Hello and welcome to the Hayrion podcast, your guide to everything concerning the politics and business of the Middle East, North Africa, and beyond. Welcome, dear listeners. Today we will be discussing Hizballah, everything that concerns Hizballah, and I believe we will provide you with a really exhaustive introduction to the history and the present-day activities of this movement. I am Katarina Shomodieva, the CEO of Hayrion, and my guests today are Dr. Marek Čejka and Dr. Josef Kraus. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Hello.
So let's start with a brief historical introduction. What exactly is the Hizballah, and how did it gain its present-day political prominence? Dr. Kraus?
Well, it started early 80s in South Lebanon. During the time, the country was in the very heavy and bloody civil war. And Hezbollah erupted from nowhere with a strong Iranian support of the Shia community at the south of Lebanon as a reaction to the Israeli military invasion to this territory. So it started with Hezbollah being the resistant force to the Israeli military forces being occupying the South Lebanese territory, and we might call it a militia. But since then, there's been a huge development of this organization, quite often for Iranian money, because still Iranians are behind, and they are more like puppet masters of the puppets. I wouldn't call Hezbollah clearly a puppet of Iran, but definitely it's an Iranian proxy in many things, or defending Iranian international policies and national interests. We are going to speak about that later on, I'm sure. So that's how it started in the 80s. And since then, Hezbollah developed to the organization with comprehensive scales of abilities and providing many services to the Lebanese citizens, mainly Shiites at the Shia inhabited territories, such as building up the infrastructure, providing the social services, building up mosques, hospitals, schools, and, of course, it's very strong Lebanese political party as well, participating on the central Lebanese politics.
Dr. Čejka?
Yes, exactly. One of the reasons of success of this movement in the 80s was its complexity, or its growing complexity from the militia movement into some kind of mixture between the militia, social movement, political party, and so on and so on. So in this way, it's comparable, for example, with Hamas. Hezbollah is even more powerful because it operates in a territory which is not under direct control of Israel. It has very strong ally in Iran. Hamas, it's much more like complicated situation from its point of view. But the structure is also similar, and it's also successful because of its complexity, because it's not a traditional radical movement from 70s, 80s with some kind of charismatic leader and a hierarchical structure, but it's so like some kind of network of many different wings, like this political, social, radical media wing, for example, and so on and so on. So in 80s, it was, from my point of view, some kind of a new model of very successful radical movement, and it continues until nowadays. And this is also one of the reasons why it's such difficult to defeat this kind of movement, because it's so interconnected with the society, either in southern Lebanon or in Gaza, because it, for example, guarantees that some basic social things especially to the poor people, to the refugees, and so on, so on.
So we must say that in certain areas, it replaces the state, which is unable to provide its citizens with the necessary services.
Exactly.
Thank you. In the media, we mostly hear about the activities of the military wing of Hezbollah, but the entire movement is a lot more complex. What other fractions and wings are there, and what are their activities? Kraus.
Well, the structure itself is not quite clear for the outsider, but we can follow the outcomes of the structure. And there's really many social programs, even the charity helping poor people, which is also demanding and a source of the support of the movement and the political party in the same time. And plus, it's present in the top of the Lebanese politics in Beirut. It really helps the movement itself to express their vision of social stability and social issues in general. It can really support its ideology on the center level of Lebanese politics, and it can really penetrate fully the Shia society, the territories that are under control of Hezbollah, which is mainly the south of Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley, close to Syrian borders. So it's really like the ultimate authority, much more influential than the Lebanese state. It's like the parallel state inside of the Lebanese state, which is the main source of the power of the movement, with the strong support from the actor of Iran, which provides money, weapons, and of course political support in the same way, and ideology. It's an ideological movement a lot. Like it's not only about controlling the territory and providing the services to the citizens, it's also about spreading the ideology of the creation or establishment of the Islamic Republic of the Iranian kind at the Lebanese territory.
Yeah, what is also very specific, for example, what is different in the case of Hizballah, for example, from Hamas, it has also very strong international network outside Lebanon. Of course, it's also a little bit developing and sometimes increasing, sometimes decreasing in some part of the world. But for example, very discussed was the South American branch between Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil. There were also some terror activities in Argentina, very serious one, which were a little bit, at least in some cases, interconnected with the activities of some persons connected with Hezbollah movement. But there is also very powerful, economically powerful Lebanese diaspora, and also some parts of it, of course, because it's also divided from the point of religion identity as the Lebanese society. But for example, some part of the diaspora also can be like very helpful to supporting Hezbollah. The Hezbollah is also connected with drug trafficking and so on. And it's also very influential even in the fields which are not usually connected with radical movements. For example, it focused on all aspects of Lebanese society. It has, for example, also some kind of it's some kind of scout organization. It's called Scout of Imam Mahdi, some little bit based on some little bit modified principles of scouting, because it's very popular movement in the Middle East. So it's really like very complex movement which is influencing all parts of the Lebanese society, including children.
What about Hezbollah's media activities, Dr. Čejka?
Hezbollah is very active in this field, and it was also very flexible from traditional media like television and its own television station, Al-Manar.
Radio, Al-Nur.
Exactly. And its own newspaper. They were also very flexible, and they also now have the new media. They are very active in the social networking and so on. So they are definitely very able in this media propaganda or media information, disinformation, and so on.
I would just add the emphasis on the social medias in this, and Hezbollah is doing a great job. And there are even some similarities. That's why some say, it might be the conspiration theory, that are educated in Russian Federation, because there are really some very similar ways how Hezbollah tried to influence the opinion of Lebanese public by social media. So having a fake and huge numbers of fake accounts trying to express their opinion on the political issues, social issues, on anything, attacking the main characters of the Lebanese politics, trying to blame them for being the Israeli spies, etc., etc. And there is a huge, massive flow of these Hezbollah-controlled accounts and Instagram, Telegram, and Twitter or X. So they really learned the lesson how to deal with this. And obviously, they are a lot ahead from other actors inside of the Lebanese politics. So that's why they are very much successful for defending and reaching their political goals.
How popular, realistically, is Hezbollah among the Lebanese population, Dr. Kraus?
Quite high. It's very popular among Shiites, naturally, even though the Shia community might be divided if we look at the surveys or even the elections. So we might see there are actually two parties competing each other in there, and one is Amal and the other is Hezbollah. And right now they both have 15 MPs in the parliament. So I would say their political strength might be quite similar. But despite this, of course, Hizballah is much more stronger in these social activities and social issues. And of course, it's much more stronger in this military dimension as well. So that's the popularity among Shiites. And of course, it's not so much popular among Sunnis and naturally among Christians, but still able to divide the Christian community into two parts. One part, which is totally against Hezbollah, and see Hezbollah as a main threat to national security and, of course, political stability, and main threat which is going to be facing in the future if there would be eruption of violence, meaning civil war. So they would definitely fight Hezbollah in this. But there is another part of Christian community represented by the Free Patriotic Movement Party, with Gibran Basil being in charge, which has the more, I would call it, or they call it, pragmatic approach, saying, okay, we cannot ignore Hezbollah. We cannot compete Hezbollah because of its military strength and the partnership and patronage Iran behind. So we should settle down. We should negotiate. Maybe we should cooperate and collaborate with Hezbollah. And that is the issue for the Christian community right now. And that is the main issue affecting the division of Lebanese Christian politics. There are these two blocks being represented on one side by Lebanese forces like the strongest anti-Hezbollahi Christian party, and the Free Patriotic Movement on the other side, like the most influential and most powerful pro-Hizballahi Christian party. So this division inside of the Christian community, it's quite a relevant issue.
This is very interesting, this reshuffling of the alliances. For example, Western people, they usually assume that such conflicts like in Lebanon and Middle East, it should be according to lines, the Christians against the Muslims and so on. Yes, this little bit worked in, for example, in the beginning of the civil war in Lebanon, but then it's completely changed and it lost some kind of logic for us. And also some Christian parties, some Christian leaders, Christian militiamen, I think the biggest example is the General Aoun, who was fighting Hezbollah in the time of the civil war, but then it became to be its ally later. Yeah, so, and there are so many similar changes, reshufflings, and so on in Lebanese politics, which makes it extremely complicated.
One of the most important questions is, where does Hezbollah get its financing? Čejka?
Yeah, there are various sources of financing. Of course, the biggest donor or biggest supporter is Iranian regime, because Hezbollah is considered to be as to be some kind of one of the strongest proxy militias or proxy movements of Iran. There are also like some Lebanese donors, supporters. There are also the supporters from some parts of Lebanese diaspora. There are the sources from some criminal activities, from the drug smuggling and weapon smuggling, weapon business, and so on. And of course, Hezbollah itself is very economically active. It has its own businesses, business ventures, and so on, so on.
Dr. Kraus, would you like to add something?
Quite complex answer. Like, really, the most visible thing is the Iranian influence behind. Like, really, there is the Iranian state budget subventing a lot the Lebanese Hezbollahi case, and it's quite visible everywhere. If you go to the south of the country using the highway, there are Lebanese and Iranian flags next to the highway all the way. If you visit Bekaa Valley or Baalbek city, the entrance, there are pictures of Ayatollahs from Iran next to the General Secretary Hassan Nasrallah of Lebanon, of Hezbollah. And if you visit the place, all these mosques being built up for the Iranian money keeps or holds the architecture of the Iranian mosque style. Everything is visible. Everything is just to show off the Iranian money flow and the Iranian power presence. So this is the most visible part. But of course, there are these less visible things like the drug trafficking. And with this, we might even call Hezbollah being the organized crime structure. It's like a mob.
There are certain information available about Hezbollah being financed by the Lebanese diaspora involved in diamond exploration in Africa. What do you know about this?
Actually, Lebanese in general, they are quite common in Africa. In places like Nigeria, there is a strong Lebanese community, not constituted by Shiites only, but also by Christians. They are very successful in business there. I think if you go to Nigeria to make a business, it's very easy to find the Lebanese businessman or business partner. They are really behind everything. So usually even the exploitation of natural resources of different kind of African state is naturally the source of this business. So it is for Hizballah. So I'm pretty sure not only diamonds and others, I think even different kind of expensive metals would be in the same way. And of course, even drugs. So why not? The money doesn't sting.
What weapons does Hezbollah use and where does it get them from? Is there a traceable connection with North Korea, such as in the case of Hamas? Dr. Čejka?
It's still, even the Hezbollah is a very strong player. It's still, for example, asymmetric conflict with Israel. So those are usually the weapons of asymmetric warfare. For example, Hezbollah doesn't have its own air force, or I think maybe they captured some Israeli tanks, but I think this is definitely not the core of its armament. So usually they use some like light weaponry, like machine guns, submachine guns, rifles, pistols, and of course, much more sophisticated current weaponry as drones and rockets. I think they are very widely used. Some of them are Russian or even Soviet-made still. Many of them are developed by Iran, by Iranian army or by Iranian industry. Sometimes they're also bought or supplied from Syria, but they are also usually some Soviet or Russian arms. If there is of course, there are also some weapons which were, for example, captured from the Israeli soldiers. So they also sometimes use Israeli guns or some other kinds of Israeli armament, or American MM16s, of course, is very popular, or of course Kalashnikovs, or even some old Czechoslovak submachine guns. They are still very, very popular in the Middle East. But this connection with North Korea, of course, I can believe it, but definitely it's not one of the strongest source of the weaponry for Hezbollah. I can very easily imagine that maybe Dr. Kraus is much more knows about the arms business. So maybe.
Well, like North Korea is one of the largest arms exporters worldwide, that's for sure. But it's much easier for them to export to China or to Russian Federation, especially right now when Russians do demand a lot of weapons and ammunition. So it's kind of difficult to deliver such a goods to really far distant place and very much controlled place like Lebanon. So I can imagine smuggling weapons from Syria or from Iran through the Iraqi territory is more likely the main source of the armament of Hezbollah. But on the other hand, I can imagine that the North Korean engineers might work on the modification, might work on improving the guns and things, maybe by providing know-how. Yeah, why not? There was a presence of North Korean engineer in Syria for such a purpose as well, like 15 years ago. So why not in Lebanon? But I don't think the track is that hot. And really the main supporter and main sponsor in the case of armaments is definitely Iran and Syrian regime.
My next question is, there has traditionally been quite a significant Palestinian population in Lebanon in the past decades. What connection do they have with Hezbollah?
This Palestinian population is actually the refugee population from, especially those are usually the people from the former British Mandate of Palestine, especially from the northern part of it, who escaped to the closest area, which was Lebanon. And there are many refugee camps in Lebanon. The majority of them are in the south, but there are some even like in Baalbek or in northern Tripoli, for example. And during the civil war, there were sometimes like alliances with the Shia forces and with Hezbollah. But this is very interesting because, of course, not all of the Palestinian refugees are politically active or are radical and so on. But the highest activity of the radicals from the refugee camps was in the southern part of Lebanon because of the closeness of Israeli territory, of the infiltration and so on. And usually, for example, in the 70s or beginning of 80s, after Black September in Jordan, when the Palestinian militias came to South Lebanon, many Shia people in South Lebanon, they were very scared of transmitting of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict into its territory. And they didn't like the Palestinian refugees so much because of this thing. But after the Israeli army invaded in 1982, there was also some shorter invasion before. They also lost it's interesting. It was some quote of Israeli general and Prime Minister Ehud Barak. He said, when we came to Lebanon, some Shia villages, they welcomed us with a perfumed rice and so on. And when we returned back, there was a Hizballah movement. So it was also another very controversial Israeli policy in Lebanon. They also lost possible ally in most of the Shia community. And because of the Israeli strategy towards the local Shia population, not just against the Palestinians or Palestinians militias, they became to be very there was a big escalation of violence and tension, and they lost all the support. And there was also Hezbollah and Shia movements, Shia militias, much more allied to the Palestinians.
Dr. Kraus, do you have anything to add?
Well, first of all, the Palestinians in Lebanon are usually considered being the alienic element. Nobody wants them there. There are 500,000 living there for 3 generations. And of course, they have zero chance to reach the Lebanese citizenship. Why? Because if you just provide the citizenship to 500,000 of Sunni Palestinians, that would totally disbalance the situation based on demography. That would really threaten by a civil war. So this is something that unites the Lebanese population. Again, I would say Shiites, Sunnis, and Christians, they want the Palestinian refugees away from the country because it really costs a lot. It threatens the stability and brings the other social unpleasant things like the highest level of criminality and social pathologies like prostitution and drug addictions. Everything is connected to the poor people from the refugee camp naturally because their situation is kind of desperate. But still, there is this problem that a majority of the population of Lebanon would be happy if they just get rid of Palestinians. It's really, really tremendous topic for them.
And definitely the position of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon is the most complicated if we compare, for example, with Jordan, Syria, or the other countries where the higher number of Palestinian refugees are. I personally visited a lot of Palestinian refugee camps in the year 2010, which was very interesting. It was also very nice to speak with the people and to hear their experiences. But it was also, for example, interesting from the point of view of visual representation of radical movements, because you can see how the people, even if their political situation is so complicated and they are so isolated, they at least try to identify with some particular Palestinian political movement. So I've never seen so many political propaganda posters from various groups, from Fatah, leftist, Marxist Palestinian groups to Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad in any Palestinian refugee camp in the West Bank.
Given the ongoing crisis in practically every aspect of public life in Lebanon, is it an exaggeration to claim that Hezbollah possesses stronger military and political power than the centralized Lebanese government? Dr. Kraus.
In some aspects, I would say yes. In some aspects, I would say no. But definitely it's challenging for the state authority having such an actor and its own soil. It's really challenging if you try to enforce the rule of law over the whole territory, and you're not able to do so. This is really the significant symbol of a weak state. And the central authority has to deal with the militia, has to deal with Hezbollah controlling the local economy, controlling the local infrastructure and things. And of course, it's very difficult for Lebanese forces of any kind, the police or even military forces, to enter the territories that are under control of Hezbollah, which is quite crucial in the case of south of Lebanon and the neighboring country of Israel. So how can the Lebanese army really defend the country against possible Israeli threats if Hezbollah won't allow the Lebanese army to fully enter and penetrate the territory for the defense? Hezbollah is the one being responsible for defense of the south of Lebanon, which is also, again, challenging the state authority a lot. But on the other hand, Hezbollah at the political level has to deal with other political parties. Otherwise, it would risk the eruption of violence, meaning the civil war again. And obviously, Hezbollah is not into the civil war in Lebanon, but of course, there is always an option of the civil war. So at least Hezbollah can use its presence in the top Lebanese politics as a leverage over other parties or other entities, blackmailing them like you have to include us into this decision-making process Otherwise, we would block everything. And now we can see the blockage, speaking about the presidential elections, that's been happening here for 2 years and without any result. So in this case, even Hizballah has to tolerate the system in Beirut, has to participate on the system in the Beirut. And if there is a participation, of course, there is less chance that the whole system would collapse and would turn into the violence.
Definitely. We have to always look to the Hizballah as a multifaceted movement. For example, they can play their political games, including finding some political compromise within the Lebanese politics. But on the other hand, they are exceptional because they have their own army, very strong one, which is not so much dependent on the Lebanese army. So they can do very different political, military, terrorists, and so on businesses connected with these wings. So there are really many faces of Hizballah, and its political strengths and so on can be measured from variety point of views.
What about Hezbollah and the current Hamas-Israel conflict?
Well, based on the situation we might follow, Hezbollah is trying to tie up at least some part of Israeli forces at the north. So all these skirmishes we might follow, these rocket attacks, shooting out from one side to another, is definitely at least tied up some parts of the Israeli forces with the threat of opening the second front on the north. But I'm skeptical about the real will of Hezbollah for doing so, opening the second front. Right now, I read the situation in a way that Hezbollah is not into direct conflict with Israel, and it's not in its favor. It's not in the favor of his puppet master or the main sponsor, which is Iran. That would really escalate the situation in the regional conflict of very huge, devastating consequences. And definitely it's not in the favor of Hezbollah. That would risk the Hezbollah position inside of Lebanese politics. That would definitely threaten the Iranian position in the region, which is technically seeking for dominance in one hand and seeking for détente with the West to withdraw the sanctions from the US. And everybody's waiting for the American presidential elections as well. That's another dimension of the story. So I would really say that the Israeli Hizballah interrogations that are maybe happening somewhere behind, we cannot see, are definitely in the favor of preventing the real conflict, direct conflict between those two, and preventing the escalation. Like they want to keep it in the hands and under control. After one of the actor, Israel or Hezbollah, would lose the control, that would cause a very terrible situation they try to avoid.
Yeah, exactly. For Hezbollah, it's always much more advantageous to be in this position, to be some kind of weaker player in this asymmetric conflict than to be in the direct confrontation, like direct, for example, Israeli invasion and so on. So I think this is also a little bit determining their limits. Of course, they want to provoke, they are aggressive, definitely, but they have also some red lines. So this is my assumption that this very now much more tense situation after the 7th of October, and then after the Israeli invasion of Gaza, when Hezbollah proclaimed that they are help their brothers in Gaza and so on, so on. So I think that still this is some kind of red line which they don't want to pass and to escalate the conflict too much.
I would even call it a calculation. Like if they really would go to the war, Hezbollah with Israel, they would do so for their own purposes and their own interests, but not for the purposes and interests of Hamas. This is really, the price would be very high, and they would be able to pay it for their own interests, but not for the interests of Palestinians.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. This is it for today, and I'm really looking forward to our next podcast together. Thank you, Dr. Kraus. Thank you, Dr. Čejka.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you for listening to the Chayrion podcast. We are looking forward to sharing with you more exciting news on the politics and business of the Middle East, North Africa, and beyond. For further information, please follow us at chayrion.com, as well as on X and LinkedIn.